into it, I want to hear some wisdom from you, Ari. I want your knowledge to be transmitted through the air into my mind. Let's start with just a bit of background for those who do not know who you are. You are a cloud solutions engineer with over 10 years of experience. You and Bart know each other quite well, so I'm going to let you talk about that one. But this talk today is all about Kubernetes cost control. And I know that is something top of mind for many of us because it is something that you can burn yourself very, very easily with. I'm sure you have some war stories, and I look forward to hearing about them. But before we get into any of that, I know Bart wanted to tell us a little bit about the background that you both have. So I'll let him take over and give us a scoop on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dimitri. Yeah, just as a short intro, I can very proudly say that I hired Ari when a company that I was working in, which was very much focused on marketing solutions for e-commerce in shopping cart abandonment prevention. We had a huge problem with spending on cloud spending. We were using Microsoft Azure at the time, and the cost had just got completely out of control. People were spinning up virtual machines without really thinking about the consequences of that. There were also some even some security things, but primarily the costs were just completely out of control. So we specifically needed to find somebody who could bring that know-how and necessary leadership skills to, at that point in ops, I think, and Nadi, you can help me with this, but I think we're about 25 people. And then in terms of development, there were, I think, about 150 developers. So
Yeah, more or less.
obviously there's a big cultural change that needed to happen at that point. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. The other thing that I have to add is that if you look for Adi's name on YouTube, you'll see a couple of other talks that he's given about this particular subject. But you will also find videos of Ari doing his other passion, which is kickboxing. My legs could tell many war stories about painful times that Artie kicked me because we used to train in the same gym. Anyways, that's another part of Artie's many abilities is his strength inside and outside of the ring. And he's so brave that today he decided he does not need a PowerPoint, so the gloves are truly off. Ari, could you give us just a little bit of background about how you got into tech first?
Into tech, yeah. The First of all, hi everybody. Nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me, Dimitrios and Bart, of course. Yeah, the tech question is very difficult actually because I don't really have a tech background in that sense. It's not like my parents pushed me into the tech world and said like, "Here you have your boards of soldering and those kind of things." But I did start in that area where my father first taught me a little bit how to solder a broken cable that we had in the house because back in those days you still used to do that instead of buying something new right away, right? Instead of throwing it away and buying a new one. And that's actually how it did start. And then we got our first PC in the house, and yeah, before I know it, I was taking it apart, putting it back together. And that's when we decided that I was gonna choose, because you need to choose when you're very young. That no, I chose to go into the area of IT, right? So I did right away. You specify your education into that direction, and I ran through the first years until 18 years, everything related with IT, and then I started university in the University of Rotterdam, following the IT engineer education there. Yeah, so and that's where now where it was more higher level in that sense, more yeah, related to the nowadays technologies, which is already 10 years ago, but I mean it's now more advanced at least. And after that, I started working for a consulting company in the Netherlands as an IT consultant, starting of course at one of the lowest levels, or it's not a low level. I don't want to patronize anyone, but a lower level of IT, with solving incidents, server management, those kind of things. Yeah. So.
Okay. And in the last few years, can you give us just a little bit of background about what you've been doing since then?
Yeah. So after my experience in Holland, I moved to the Basque Country because I'm living here in the Basque Country in Spain, in Bilbao. And here I found a job also for a consulting company. where I started to work for a big energy supplier for Iberdrola. And after that, I made what I always call my best decision in my professional career is when I changed to V Global, and that's where I really started to work with cloud technologies and yeah, and all these modern technologies, which was what I said, the best experience I've had so far. Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, to take us a little bit further into that context where we started working together, had a huge demand for this particular problem of just out of control spending across the board. Can you just give us a bit of background about how much was being spent per month at that point? How many virtual machines were being spun up? What was the context that you found and said, hey, I got to start putting these pieces together to see how we can make this situation improve as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I can start by saying that it was a bit like here you have our costs and here you have our environment. Take it and try to organize it. And it was like downloading the Excel sheet from Microsoft, full of costs, which was like 300,000 lines long, which each of the single, 5 minutes used of VM, right? And there I went calculating, filtering an Excel sheet, which took like 1 week. Nah, first I started to automate that, and I thought like, nah, this is impossible to do. When I started, to mention numbers, we were I think around 1.5, like 150,000 euros. Where at the peak a month I'm talking about, when at the peak of expenditure, like monthly costs, we touched around 260,000 euros. Yeah, that was the peak moment, 65,000 euros, and that for a rather small company. I mean, yeah, which was mainly due to the cost running out of hand, right? It was just no organization in that sense.
And that's exactly it. Is in terms of approaching this, what were the main problems that were causing this totally out of control spending?
When I got in there, the thing what I saw was that no one was really focused on the cost, right? So there was not what I call there was no cost consciousness inside the company, right? So all the development teams, now there were different teams developing the products that we were offering to our clients, and these development teams, they didn't really have the idea of thinking like, hey, what I'm creating now is going to generate this amount of cost, right? So it was just what we say now, what they say in Spanish, barra libre, open bar, and you can just create whatever you want, the resources that you want, and we just need this running, right? So as quick as possible. So you had different teams, but even within different teams, people were making different tests, spinning up their own clusters and VMs and creating storages, and but we're talking about pretty big clusters and modern architecture, right? I'm talking about Kafka clusters or Mesos or Docker, or not just some simple VMs. No, we're talking about maybe 1,500 to 2,000 virtual machines that we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they don't put their toys away, and
that's it.
Can get out of hand
real
quick.
Yeah.
What did you do? How did you get this culture instilled in them to make sure that they knew how much they were spending?
And without having to use kickboxing moves.
Yeah. I couldn't use my skills there, right? My street skills. No. No, it was very hard for me because, I mean, just imagine yourself joining a company. You're just being thrown in front of the wolves, right? You have this big amount of costs that are being spent. Everybody has their own piece of infrastructure that they want to keep on to. No, they say like, no, but this VM I'm using for this, and no one wants really that you touch their stuff, right? Which is pretty typical in that world, right? No, I'm using this VM. Just leave it a bit more, no? So first of all, what we tried to do was to organize the visibility of all this, so to get more visibility into what we're spending and who's spending it, right? So we had a lot of resources, and what I say, we only had like 1,500 virtual machines in different subscriptions, right? So you had the development subscription, the continuous integration subscription, pre-production, production. But who's using what for, which project, what team, right, or which cost center, or project it was based or it was used for. And that was the first thing that we started to try to get now together, right? So we started implementing there. We started there with the implementation of tags. So tagging all the resources. First of all, we had like a setup of 3 or 4 tags. And from where your question comes, also, how did you attack this? How did you make the people like work with you? Because this was mainly based. Now it was a team effort. So also with certain members from management, we had to push this and we had to say, listen, we need you to by the end of this month have these tags implemented in your resources, right? And that's how we pushed it. Yeah.
And in terms of doing that, would you say it was essential to use external tools in order to get that visibility that you were talking about that was so important, or was there enough internally from being on Azure that you thought you could do it that way?
There was by that time there was a solution from Azure itself, because this was all on Microsoft Azure, right? So they had their own cost management tool that they were using. We at the end we made a small analysis and we chose a different solution. But at that time we chose for Cloud Health. It's a company from the States. At that moment we thought, no, weighing a bit the costs of the solution against what they were giving us, that they were the best fit for our needs, right? So together with the implementation of the tags, so I would say, so this group of machines is part of this project. The responsible one of the responsible team is this team. Together with Cloud Health, we could get like there's a lot of visibility there, right? You could see the nice diagrams, you could create reports, alerting. You could say like, hey, if there's a spike in costs in no in one day, but send me an email right away. So yeah, that's where this management tool helped us enormously. Yeah.
So, as you've seen shit hit the fan a few times, what are some typical mistakes that you feel like happen over and over, or patterns that you've seen when the costs go up, or what are some things that we can avoid?
Communication is a big one, of course. So the communication between the teams, that's a very very big one here, I think. No, but what we've seen, you were talking about war stories. Now this could be one of the war stories also. The communicate, it's not so much communication, it's also part of responsibility, of permissions. And now we go a bit into the permissions part. So how much responsibility do you give, or how much freedom do you give to your teams, right? So what we saw, for example, was now we had teams that were able to create their own infrastructure. So of course this process passed by operations, by ourselves, we would approve it, but then after that these teams had their own permissions within this infrastructure, so they were able to scale it up or down depending on the type of infrastructure. And we're talking now about some SaaS, some software as a service products, right? So what we saw here now, coming back to this war story, is that we had a team in place which changed one certain variable in their setup, in their configuration. And when we did the end of the month calculations, or no, and we checked the cost of that month, we saw a spike of 30,000 euros, which was generated in that last week of that month.
Ouch.
And this was before setting up these alerts and this whole system. This is also when right away management gave us the green light of contracting of contracting one of these management tools, right?
And with that, sorry, just in terms of like learning curve and getting people on board with that, and because like you said, communication is so key here. Did you, in terms of getting people on with that tool, was it mostly you focused on that, or did you have to train other people on how to use that as well?
No, of course, this is what I said before. This was a big team effort. So, and now it's not just that I did this by myself. So I was communicating with all the different teams. We had a small action group there working on this now. So we were operating in different countries also, so different offices. So in each office we had like a responsible person which would push the different teams into new implementations that we would make, based on the cost reduction part, right? So we would introduce these tags, or would introduce a new size of machine, and these people would push this around, right? So yeah, what we would do, like, no, we would push for the changes. I'm lost a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm trying to focus on the next part that I wanted to say.
It's all good.
Tell me again, please.
No. In the sense of like I said, it's one thing to start using a tool, and this sometimes is like, I think their tooling is very important, but I think it can be a little bit dangerous, and we've seen big fights happen about tools as well.
That's the thing. Yeah,
is
sorry.
that it's not just getting the tool on board, just in the same way that it's not getting access to the cloud, is understanding all the implications that's going to involve in terms of how you budget your time. All of a sudden, you're going to have to spend more hours to keep the monitoring and things like that up to date. Particularly, like I said previously, in an e-commerce context, and we'll look at this a little bit later, but where you're going to have peak times, and so the monitoring becomes even more important depending on what part of the year you're in.
And I'll just
that's
jump
what we're
in
kind of going
and
for.
say real fast, it's funny to me that it wasn't until the company spent an extra 30 grand in a week that they said, okay, we need a tool to look at our cloud costs. That's definitely something that'll get you buying or outsourcing a tool so you can cover your costs.
I think it's very true, and I think it's a good point that we can probably get into a little bit later. Is that the cost consciousness shouldn't come about only because of an emergency where you realize, oh crap, our costs are skyrocketing this much in a week, but it's how you can have that in place beforehand. Kind of what's similar to what we talked about with Sierra Faceta about security consciousness and things like that when approaching VMs and getting in the cloud. But yeah, like I said, is that the coordination, communication aspects in this, particularly when in our case we had 3 development centers in different countries. Everyone has their own dialect of English, and so sometimes things get lost in translation. There are a lot of different forms of resistance against these kind of plans. So that's what I was kind of going for, is to see the different how much time that took, and the patience that you have to have in coordinating these kinds of initiatives.
I'm sorry, I got lost in my own speech there a little bit. No, but you guys are totally right. It's amazing that after spending so much money, that then now people get like, oh, we should really do something right now, right? That's to be it's not a typical being reactive instead of proactive, right? So no, the difficulty here was indeed like to teach these teams to work with these tools, with the tools that we're implementing. So in this case, we're implementing cloud health. We're telling them to adopt all kind of best practices related to the cost reduction, cost control area. But yeah, all these teams are with their hands full already with their own work. Not everybody is as motivated maybe, or as interested, or they just simply don't have the time to focus on it. So what we would try to do was, in each team we would assign a responsible person, a responsible cost responsible employee there. And those were the ones that would push in each of the teams. So first of all, that's where I went actually before. I said in each of the offices we had one person which pushed the teams, but within the teams also we assigned a person who would be responsible. Normally this was the job of the PM, right? Who would lead the team anyhow through their tasks and their sprints and everything. But they also gained this task of pushing for the changes that we requested. Those were also the first ones that got access to this cost management tool, because we wanted them to realize how much money we were spending also. So that's where also we gave more visibility to the company itself, saying, listen, maybe you don't know how necessary this cost reduction project. Now you have the numbers, and people really came to us like, shit, are we really spending so much money, like because we're really spending a lot of money. I mean, 200,000 euros a month in cloud is big.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, who is the one at the end of the day that's accountable for that bill? Is it you, or is it the CFO? Is it the software engineers that don't put their toys away? Who's the one that has to take the brunt of that and be responsible there?
No, yeah, that's at the end. That depends a bit on the situation, right? So if you have everything set up the way it should be set up, more or less, then you get to the point where you say, okay, now I see that this team has an enormous spike. Let's first of all check the reason of this spike. Why did this happen? Where we're spending so much? Did they add more hosts? No more nodes? Did they add more storage, or what did they do? What was the reason for this spike? If this spike was necessary, if this increase in infrastructure was necessary, then of course the team cannot be responsible for this. Then it would just be a necessary cost. If it's a cost that's not predicted and not necessary, then normally, I mean, the responsibility always lies at the end with with the one being on top of these costs, right? So you're talking about the CFO here. So it could be the CFO who receives the alerts. So in case there's a spike, in what we had set up, for example, was that if in one day the costs would increase of a certain resource with 10%, then we would receive an alerting email, right? So if he's, for example, the CFO is not checking his alerting emails, yeah, then it depends a bit on the situation and the company also, because there will be companies who give more power maybe to the team itself and say, hey, we're going to send you the alerts, and others would say we're going to send it to the CFO, who is responsible, who it's his job to know what we're spending, and he just needs to be on top of it. But then you get this culture of the CFO needs to be telling his children, right, to not to spend so much. So where do you want to go a bit, right? Like it's complicated, that question. Yeah.
No, I think it's a good point, because just as we said, like, we're talking about a culture of cost optimization and keeping these things in mind. But I think Dimitri's question is a very good one, is, whose responsibility is this at the end of the day? And I think each company kind of has to decide that. With that in mind, since you were mentioning the point about alerts being automatically sent and things of that nature, we kind of talked a little bit about earlier in terms of scaling. I mean, like, this was an e-commerce based company, so Black Friday was a big money maker, and then also Cyber Monday and Singles Days and other peak times in terms of e-commerce, from a cost optimization perspective, but at the same time wanting to keep that flexibility through scaling. How did you approach that?
Yeah, this being prepared for these special days, these peak days that you have in the year, at least in this company, where other companies maybe have peaks around for example, seasonal peaks, right? For when people start booking flights or booking holidays or whatever. We would normally there would be a testing period for the environment, so everything would be put in place or prepared, at least for the big peaks and spikes here. But the more this auto scaling mechanism was implemented in the different areas, in the different projects, we saw that it was less necessary to be on top of it in that sense. The main thing that always was confirmed and checked a bit was now the databases and the big data clusters and those things now, because that's where the data goes, and if you lose that, then you could lose revenue there. So yeah, we normally had a period, what I said, a period of testing there to before this period would start. So normally a month before or something, we would start preparing the environment, test if everything would work, the auto scale configurations and mechanisms that we would put in place, or that already were in place, and if necessary, maybe here and there increase certain limits that we wanted to increase. Yeah. Of course, these periods are very tricky, because you never know what's gonna come to you until it's there. Because if you look at for example, Black Friday, right? In these areas, in these kind of companies with online products, Black Friday can be a big boom enormously, right? Now also with the coronavirus, I'm sure that there have been companies that have had an enormous amount of traffic for all the visits to their website, because no one could get out of the house because of the different lockdowns and protocols. So how do you prepare for that? I mean, you never know how big this increase is going to be. So what you see here also is that people tend to over provision before losing there in not having enough provision, right? Maybe you don't provision enough, because maybe now in Black Friday, I think in the last 10 years, I don't know how much it has gone up, but I think it's like 500 or 1,000% that the amount of traffic and sales has gone up, which means that the same amount of traffic to these servers is also, increased. So yeah.
No, I remember when we were talking a few weeks ago with a guy from Zalando, and he was talking. We were just looking at the numbers, and it was like 4 billion website visits per year. I don't know how many millions of orders, how many millions of customers. With all that kind of traffic, like you said, the provisioning conversation absolutely has to be there. Now, to take it a little bit further, now into more of the subject about Kubernetes, and then obviously data on Kubernetes. When was the first time that you heard about Kubernetes? How did you start working with it?
Yeah, this also happened in, I think it was around 2017, 18, late 17, beginning 18, I think, which was also, it was partially part of reducing the costs also. So thinking like, should we move our microservices or other services to a Kubernetes environment, right? So that's where I had my first encounter with Kubernetes, and I have to say that it works really good if you compare it with traditional environments, right? With more infrastructure as a service. There also being said that it also depends on how you program or how you make, or how the teams make their applications. I mean, you can move an application from a more traditional setup to containerize that, to put it as a containerized microservice or application. But if they still keep the code the same and big, and then yeah, what do you really win there? So
I remember before we jumped on, you were saying, "Don't mention that word monolith around
yeah,
me."
I know. I don't, like, I'm more like a street talk kind of person in that sense, right?
Don't know what the Dutch slang
What-
is for monolithic, but you'll have to teach us later.
The Dutch know, and they speak English perfectly. If there's any Dutch person listening,
They know. So, as far as cost control with Kubernetes and what we really came to talk about, what are some learnings that you've had over the years when you've been using this and you've been trying to make sure that the costs don't get out of control? Because it is, as we said before, it's very easy to burn yourself, and it it's almost like it's been made that easy, with everything at your fingertips, like at the developer's fingertips, they can spin up whatever they want. But it's also, there needs to be a little bit of oversight, or there needs to be some barriers that are in mind so that things don't get too out of control. And so what are some tips that you have for us on that?
yeah, so there are multiple answers here. First of all, about the teams to take in mind, to take care a little bit that they don't create too many clusters or resources or infrastructure, right? I would say here to not to deny them access or something, but to really configure this oversight in the correct manner, right? Like in the beginning when we in this company where we worked for example, we gave the teams the freedom to create whatever they want in a development environment, in the CI environment, right? For their tests and everything. Later on, we implemented a set of steps where someone from the operations team would have to first approve the changes that they were requesting, right? Or the new hardware or nodes, or more a bigger tier of a certain service, right? So that's one of the things that I think is very important, that you should not be binding people's hands in saying just do this and this is what you need to do and nothing more. Now give them a little bit of freedom, but do it controlled, right? So that's very important. If then we go to Kubernetes, like where could you save costs in Kubernetes? I think in Kubernetes the most not most important, but one of the important things here would be the sizing of your clusters, right? The sizing together with the scaling of the clusters. What you see in Kubernetes now, they made it super easy that more pods will now are created in your cluster when necessity arrives, right? But make sure that this is set up correctly, that you create the good resource limits also, because before you know it, you create a lot of pods where maybe you're giving not too much resources, so you also need more nodes. So there you go with your scaling, your auto scaling, which works against you. It's very easy to create a very big cluster when not even needing that big cluster, right?
And with that, with that in mind, do you find that there are a lot of similarities between the cost optimization, cost reduction strategies used for Azure that you also find in Kubernetes, or what would you say would be the differences?
Yeah, if we compare the cost optimizations for our for cloud in general in that sense, because at the end Kubernetes you can run it as a service, but you can run it on your own nodes also, right? It's all in the same direction. We're talking here about using tags or labels now in Kubernetes, getting your cost from in Kubernetes, for example, from your namespaces, from your pods, from your deployments, whereas in the more traditional environment or the infrastructure environment, you would do the same, but you would get it now from everything attached to your infrastructure, right? So there we're talking about the nodes itself. Anyhow, you need to control both of them. You always need to, because you have your Kubernetes cluster running on hosts, on hardware. So you also need to monitor that hardware, right? But there are a lot of similarities. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, as far as Azure goes, how have you found, like, how do you get fast storage on Azure? Have you looked at it? Because I want to start talking a little bit more about storage as we go into this, because that is generally one of the highest costs as you start looking at Kubernetes. And I had a friend ask me, "Oh, ask Arie how you get fast storage on Azure."
Yeah, okay. But fast storage, he's referring to SSD premium storage, I imagine, right? Or
Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, so you have the different tiers in each of the providers. It's not just in Azure, right? You have it in Amazon, in Google Cloud. You can get the different, at least you can contract the different tiers or different, would you say it, performance storages, right? So you have the standard storage, you have premium storage, and with premium storage, when you also use it, for example, in a setup where you're automatically replicating it to different sites, as for high availability, then that's very expensive. Yes. For the SSD storage, which would be what we call the premium storage, which is the quicker storage. There are quicker storages even available. Yeah, that's true. Honestly, I do not have a lot of knowledge about the quicker ones in that sense, but the premium storage I do. There you just need to keep in mind: do you really need premium storage, or what do you need? Do you need to replicate it not geo-redundant, or can you manage by just replicating it within your own region to different within your data center itself? Like, what is your policy on your backup or on your security side also? Now, like, how do you want to save your data? For how much time do you want to save your data there? Because if we're talking about storage keeps on counting. We're talking about the host. The host normally is, I turn off my host and I'm not generating any costs. But as in storage, you cannot turn off your storage and you're not paying anything. Your storage is there, and yeah, there's a lot of money involved there.
And do you have any best practices on that? Like, have you seen things that work better?
I think it's very important to here to set the right the to think about the correct way of how long you should save your data, right? And set up your policies based on that. Like, is it really necessary to create a backup every day, a daily backup, then have a weekly backup, a monthly backup, and a yearly backup? And how long are you going to save these backups, right? Obviously, the yearly backup, you're not going to save it for one day. But that's what people what companies tend to do, at least, right? So they try to focus on this. I don't want to call it like older way of thinking, because it's just the way it was. No, I'm gonna have a daily backup for in case tomorrow something happens, and I'm gonna have a weekly backup so that I can always run back to and there are a lot of companies still work like that. They have a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a yearly. And I'm not generalizing here, because there will be a lot of companies who do not have that anymore also. No, the more advanced modern companies maybe, or with better policies in place. So here I would focus more on how long would I save each of these backups. I don't really see the point of because I've seen cases where the daily backups would be saved for 90 days. I personally don't see the point of doing that. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's my personal opinion, right? That's what I. So I would prefer to at least halve that to 45 or 30 days, maybe. But then you get into weekly backups and to monthly backups that you also have already. So yeah.
Great point. And so, along these lines, I know I asked you before, how many replicas is enough?
How many replicas is enough? No, that's a good one. It depends on where you set up your replica. Here I go again with depends and no all these doubtful answers that I'm giving.
Give us a straight Dutch answer.
There's no the Dutch are very direct normally. Yeah. No, how many replicas is enough? You can save your data, like you can say, I want the local redundancy in place, which means now that you can save the same backup in the same region, right? So in the same data center, but in a different cabin, no? In a different cabin or on a different host. Well, what if something happens to the data center, right? Then I don't have anything anymore. Do I need to save it to a different data center in a different area? Pues yes, that you can do. So I would say 2 should be enough. But yeah, you never really know. You also need to think about which data do you put in. Are you really saving? Right? What are you backing up here? Is it a backup that you put away and it's just a backup and you put the backup away, or is it something that keeps on where you keep on putting data, right? Because if you put data into something and it's replicating and you got a problem, an error, and you're also replicating the error, then you have a lot of faulty replicas also, right?
I've been itching to get this one. Want to make sure I get in. As we look at more people talking about hybrid cloud, or some people call it cross cloud, options of using Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. Are there any things that people need to keep in mind there regarding optimization of costs?
I think that using multi-cloud environments could be very interesting. What you need to watch out for a little bit is that you don't generate extra costs there, of course, because you need to maintain these environments. So you need to maintain 2 different subscriptions, or 2 different I mean, you need to go to Azure and you need to connect to AWS. They both have their ways of communicating, maybe. So first of all, that means also that you need to have the people in place who are able to do that, who can create it for you. But then again, it can be interesting in the cost side, because in Azure you would have certain services that are cheaper than Amazon, and vice versa, right? In the other way around also. So there it could be interesting, because maybe I don't know, but certain VMs are cheaper in Amazon, and you really need those, so you use them in Amazon, and another set of, for example, the burstable VMs like in Azure, for example, they're cheaper than the ones that Amazon offers. So you would use those on Azure, right? That would be a big. It would be an analysis to make for each company, for each situation. But it could be interesting. Just watch out with the complexity of what you create also. It could also create a little bit of redundancy, what we were talking about before, right? About know about the replicas and everything. I mean, because maybe you can save data in both of the cloud providers like that. So that could also give you options of or security options, right? Like being prepared for any whatever disaster or something. Yeah.
So I'm wondering about when it comes to Kubernetes, have you seen any big inefficiencies in the costs that you generally shy away from because you've done it once before and then you said, that wasn't the best way of doing this. This isn't a best practice. I'm going to stop doing it. I'm thinking like maybe there's something around like we were mentioning before storage, or we were mentioning also it could be with like managed services. Anything that strikes you right now as something that you wouldn't do again, so we all can learn from that and hopefully not do it?
Mm, in Kubernetes, I would say that's just based on the experience I have. To start small always, right? What you see there is that normally we tend to prepare these environments for what we want to have in a year's time, right? So I want to have this whole project or these 5 projects running on Kubernetes. So let's prepare this. I'm not saying that everybody's doing this, but these are typical mistakes that maybe they seem very harmless, but they
Yeah.
cause a lot of cost, because instead of creating 10 VMs, maybe you only need 3 VMs, for example, or nodes, or you just need to make your no your Kubernetes service smaller, right? So that's where I've seen problems, like high rises in cost. So some people starting to play now, as we say, play with Kubernetes testing in a development environment, and they think, but let's spin up a Kubernetes environment, and there you go, right? Or not turning off your environment in the in the in the in the nightly hours, or no, after work hours. Um, in these environments, that's also what you see. I mean, it doesn't make sense to keep your development cluster running, for example, throughout the night. Of course, depending on what you're running there, if it can be shut down or not, because maybe there are certain changes that you don't want to get lost, or they would get lost if you work with like with stateless applications. Or but I mean, normally in these cases, it would all be coded, right? It's all coded in saved. So the next day you should spin up your cluster again, and the cluster should be the way it was again.
I think that's such a good point how you mentioned too, like, yeah, we want this to all be running on Kubernetes in a year, but the migration also will take a lot of time. So if you have everything set up for a year from now, what you expect, but you're paying for it from now until the year when everything is fully ramped up, then that just doesn't make sense either.
Yeah.
So starting small is some nice wisdom. I like that. Now, I have one more, and it's from another friend of mine that I sourced this question from, and it's about like, since Kubernetes is a shared resource, how do you deal with costs with multi-tenant workloads? Is it shared cost across tenants?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. What you can do nowadays, and if anybody knows better than I, then please let us know. Um, with these, I would use here in this case, no, of controlling these costs. I would definitely use a kind of tool to manage it, like kubecast, or that there are multiple ones, like even Cloud Health that we were using. I don't know all of them, but I know a few of them that work with this. But they with them you can create different labels, and no, you can extract costs based on teams, projects, etc. This is also possible in multi-tenant environments, if I'm not mistaken. So by using these kind of tools, you can get a lot of insight, because I mean, you can get the cost by cluster deployment, by label, by namespace, by teams. um yeah, I don't know, I can jump in right away into these management tools, but yeah,
No,
that's
that's
what.
good. I mean, can you tell us about maybe like your favorite tool that you worked with, and maybe also your least favorite tool?
the least favorite tool. That we're not making friends. No, it was one. Honestly, I don't remember the name anymore of the one that we were using first when I started working with Azure. It was the one that was always there. It was no, they had a contract with Microsoft Azure, but I totally forgot the name, and I don't even know if they exist anymore.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. So I think that tools like kubecast, they are very specifically made for Kubernetes, right? So I think that gives a big plus, because also the development of these tools will be mostly focused on the Kubernetes environments, and not just the Kubernetes cluster itself, but also the storage behind it. They are thinking about the storages that are attached to your clusters and everything, which now relating it back a bit to the talk of data and Kubernetes, right, is very important in this case. But there are other tools also that are fairly advanced. I mean, it's very hard to say which is the better one. We used to work with Cloud Health. Yeah, what are the nice things here? I mean, these kind of tools, they nowadays they can even create automation scripts for you. They help you with your architecture. They give improvement. No, they give you like little advices and stuff. You can set up policies, alerting. Yeah, all these kind of things. Now they give you a reliability score of your Kubernetes cluster, for example. So they say your reliability score is a 7 out of 10, for example. No, and saying like your cluster is a 7 out of 10, where 10 is perfect, right?
Mm.
And there, you know, if you need to upgrade your cluster, they even give hints and tips there, and they say you should add more nodes, or you should add more CPUs, or yeah, that's very helpful there. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Well, that being said, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add as a final thought for people to keep in mind when it comes to cost control, optimization, anything that we haven't covered?
First of all, I want to say I have some articles written on LinkedIn, which you can always read. I mean, they're just written from my personal experience, giving a little small guide on what you should focus on when working with cost, or trying to optimize cost or reduce your cost. It's not so much just reduction; it's also the optimization with that, because normally you also optimize your environment, right? In the sense of yeah, that doesn't matter Kubernetes or non-Kubernetes. Always try to focus on what's there on the market, right? How are they updating the virtual machines? Normally, Azure or AWS, they create new types of machines which they put on the market a bit cheaper. Maybe it's worth it to change to them. Maybe it isn't, but you should always stay up to date with the market. Changes in that sense. Think about the spot instances, reserved instances, right? If you reserve certain types of hardware for 3 years, then you pay like 60 or 70% less than what you would pay if you just pay it as with a pay-as-you-go contract. With the storage types also, no, you get the hot versus cold storages. Where you should think about now, if do you really need to read these storages constantly or not, or is it just a backup like we talked about before? Because if it's a backup, then maybe it's more interesting to to use a different kind of storage. Yeah, everything that we mentioned a little bit. Now implement your skill sets. Auto shutdown, I would really push for also for your development environments, your continuous integration environments. Shut down those machines that you don't use in the night, right? If you leave the office at 7, but set the time at 8, and at 8 o'clock all your virtual machines, they shut down, and the next morning you schedule it that it spins up again at 6 in the morning, or when the first person normally comes into the office, and there you save almost 12 hours of cost, so almost 50% of your cost, right? So yeah, yeah, that's about it actually.
No,
I
I think it's a very, very good summary, and I think there's kind of a common thread that kind of repeats itself a little bit. Dimitri, I'm sure you would agree that as much as we're talking about extremely advanced technologies, at the end of the day, there's always a human element, whether it's about best practices or friendly reminders, cultural questions, these kind of things about really committing to these things from the very beginning, as you said previously with Kubernetes, if it's starting small, if it's with these other things regarding cost reduction and optimization of environments. of the little things you have to keep in mind from the very beginning, and always remember this is going to be an important element. It's really fun when you're playing with somebody else's money, but when it starts to be your own, you'll probably take it you take it a little bit more seriously. So it's trying to get that sort of like DNA, I guess we could say, reprogrammed for people to keep this in mind, along with all the other elements. And it's not that you don't want to have that people can't have fun when they're developing and feel that they can have that kind of freedom to explore and test things out, but to do so responsibly.
Yeah, well said.
Such a
Well
good
said.
point.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Well, Arie, if anybody wants to follow up with you, what is the best way to reach out? Are you on our Slack yet? Maybe I can convince you to get on the Data on Kubernetes Slack.
I will definitely join your Slack channel. Yeah.
There we
So
go.
and else through LinkedIn, they can always send me a message for whatever they want. Yeah, I try to follow up with different articles also on there, and yeah, what we said before. No, it's an interesting topic. I think it's very important to spread the word around this and create discussed consciousness, not just within the companies, but just throughout the whole community using these environments, right?
Nice. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate you coming here and talking with us. Thanks everybody for listening. Bart, thanks for joining us too.
My pleasure.
All right, we will see you all next week for more Data on Kubernetes, and look forward to chatting.
Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Bye-bye. Thanks, Arie.
Bye.